Dear learners, I welcome to this video lecture number 3 in Unit 2 Metrology of the subject Air Pollution and Control Engineering. In this video, we are going to see lapse rate. The temperature of the ambient air, which is nothing but surrounding air, decreases with the increase in altitude. The rate at which the temperature changes with increasing height. On the other hand, the temperature of the ambient air normally decreases with increase in the altitude. This change of temperature is called as lapse rate. The lapse rate majorly classified into two types, which is environmental lapse rate and adiabatic lapse rate. The lapse rate changes with respect to time and place. The lapse rate can be determined by raising a balloon attached with a thermometer by the digital self-recording mechanism, which is called as environmental lapse rate or ambient lapse rate or prevailing lapse rate. On the other hand, the prevailing lapse rate at a particular time and the particular place and determined by sending a balloon equipped with thermometer. Then adiabatic lapse rate. The lapse rate of a parcel of dry air when it's lifted upwards in a hydrostatically stable environment and expands slowly to the lower environment without exchange of heat is called as adiabatic lapse rate. The adiabatic lapse rate is divided into two types. They are dry adiabatic lapse rate and wet adiabatic lapse rate. Dry air expanding and cooling adiabatically at the rate of 9.8 degree Celsius per kilometer is called as dry adiabatic lapse rate. In wet air, the expanding and cooling is calculated 6 degree Celsius per kilometer, which is called as wet adiabatic lapse rate. The three major relative positions are unstable and superadiabatic lapse rate, neutral lapse rate, subadiabatic and stable lapse rate. The subadiabatic and unstable lapse rate is occurs when environmental lapse rate is greater than adiabatic lapse rate. Actual temperature is more negative. Small parcel of air displaced approximate adiabatic expansion. Heat transfer is slow compared to vertical movement. In superadiabatic with unstable condition, at a given point, temperature of air parcel is greater than temperature of surrounding air, which is less dense than surrounding air. The figure or the graph shows that the x-axis is temperature and the y-axis is height in meter, which represents the environmental lapse rate and adiabatic lapse rate. Neutral lapse rate. When environmental lapse rate is equal to adiabatic lapse rate, the environment is said to be neutral. A parcel of air carried up or down will have same temperature as environment at the new height. There is no tendency for further movement. The graph represents temperature in x-axis, height in meter in y-axis, which shows the environmental lapse rate and adiabatic lapse rate are in same position. Then stable and subadiabatic lapse rate. It occurs when environmental lapse rate is less than adiabatic lapse rate. No tendency for further vertical movement due to temperature differences. Any parcel of air will return to its original position. Parcel is cooler than air which is present above. The graph shows the difference between the temperature and the height. And the final last position is strongly stable condition. It occurs when environmental lapse rate is negative. The temperature increases with height. No tendency for further vertical movement due to temperature differences. Any parcel of air will return to its original position. The parcel is cooler than air above, which concentrates the pollutants strongly. Learners, please note that in all of these plots, the dashed lines represents the adiabatic lapse rate and the plain line represents the environment lapse rate. These are the three major relative positions which is said before when ELR greater than ALR, which is nothing but environmental lapse rate is greater than adiabatic lapse rate, is equal to unstable and super adiabatic lapse rate. When environmental lapse rate is less than adiabatic lapse rate is equal to when environmental lapse rate is equal to adiabatic lapse rate is neutral.